Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she placed George's favorite chipped coffee mug on the counter. It was always his mug, the one with the faded picture of a cartoon moose. 60 years. Today would have been their 60th wedding anniversary. The silence of the kitchen pressed in on her, heavier than usual. She glanced at the empty chair opposite hers at the small breakfast table. It was a ritual, this anniversary breakfast. Pancakes, always pancakes, with George's ridiculously strong coffee. A small, involuntary sob escaped her. A series of short, vivid memories flashed through her mind. George, younger, his hair still dark, flipping pancakes with a flourish. Their laughter echoing in a smaller, older kitchen. A picnic with checkered blankets and slightly burnt pancakes. George, his face lined with time and love, presenting her with a small, silly moose figurine, a tradition he'd started after the mug. Each image was a tiny shard of glass in her heart. She pulled out a worn photo album, its cover soft with age. There they were, young and impossibly happy, frozen in time. George's arm was around her, his grin wide and infectious. She traced the outline of his face, her finger catching on the slight crinkle of the photograph. Rufus, her aging golden retriever, whined softly at her feet, nudging her hand with his wet nose. He'd been George's dog first, a rambunctious puppy when they'd gotten him. Now, he was her only constant companion, his gentle presence a small comfort in the vast emptiness. "Should we do it, Rufus?" she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Should we go to Big Ed's?" Big Ed's barbecue was their place. Every anniversary, without fail. The thought of going alone was almost unbearable. She imagined the pitying glances, the well-meaning but ultimately hollow condolences. But a stubborn streak, a loyalty to George and their shared history, pushed her forward. She chose a simple blue dress, the one George always said made her eyes sparkle. It felt strange, getting dressed up for a solo outing, a celebration tinged with profound grief. As she drove, the familiar route was a minefield of memories. The park where they'd walked Rufus countless times, the old movie theater where they'd seen their first movie together, a black-and-white classic George had adored, the little ice cream shop where they'd always stop for a cone on hot summer nights. Each landmark brought a fresh wave of sadness, a reminder of what she'd lost. At one point, she pulled over to the side of the road, her hands gripping the steering wheel. She almost turned back. The loneliness was a physical ache. But then, a song came on the radio. Their song, a slow, romantic ballad they'd danced to at their wedding. It was a sign, she decided, a gentle nudge from George, telling her to keep going. Big Ed's was bustling, filled with the Friday lunch crowd. The aroma of smoked meat and barbecue sauce, usually so comforting, felt almost overwhelming. The hostess, a kind-faced woman named Sarah, recognized Eleanor immediately. "Mrs. Thompson, it's so good to see you," she said, her voice tinged with a mixture of warmth and sympathy. Your usual table, the table in the corner, by the window, was exactly as she remembered it. The red and white checkered tablecloth, the worn wooden chairs. She sat down heavily, placing her purse on the empty chair opposite her. She felt a wave of dizziness, a sudden, overwhelming urge to flee. Meanwhile, across the room, 3 young men were settling into a booth. Jamario Howard, a thoughtful young man with kind eyes, was the first to notice Eleanor. He was a nursing student, and his work with elderly patients had given him a deep appreciation for the challenges they faced, particularly loneliness. Beside him sat Jaquan Miller, his best friend since childhood, a boisterous, outgoing character with a contagious laugh. Completing the trio was Carlos Ramirez, quieter and more reserved, but with a loyal heart. "Look at that sweet lady over there," Jaquan said, nudging Jamario, eating all by herself. Jamario had already seen her. He'd seen the way she'd looked at the empty chair, the slight tremor in her hand as she'd reached for a glass of water. "Yeah," he said softly. "It makes me sad." He remembered his own grandmother, who had lived alone for years after his grandfather died. Carlos, initially focused on the menu, glanced up. "Maybe she likes eating alone," he offered, a little hesitantly. "Nah, man," Jaquan said, shaking his head. Nobody likes eating alone, especially not on a day like today. Look how dressed up she is. He was surprisingly perceptive. Jamario felt a familiar tug in his chest, a deep-seated empathy that wouldn't let him ignore the woman's quiet sadness. "I'm going to go talk to her," he said, surprising even himself. He hesitated for a moment, gathering his courage. What if she didn't want company? What if he was intruding? But the image of his grandmother's lonely face spurred him on. He stood up, smoothing down his shirt. "You serious, man?" Jaquan asked, grinning. "Go for it. We're right behind you." Carlos, though still a bit unsure, nodded in support. Jamario approached Eleanor's table slowly, respectfully. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said gently. "My name is Jamario. I hope I'm not bothering you, but I hate seeing people eat alone. Would you mind if I joined you?" Eleanor looked up, startled. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected anyone to notice her, let alone approach her with such kindness. She saw his sincere smile, the genuine concern in his eyes. "Oh," she said, her voice a little shaky. "Well, I suppose not." Jamario pulled up a chair, and within moments, Jaquan and Carlos had joined them. The atmosphere at the table shifted subtly. The initial awkwardness began to dissipate. "I'm Jaquan," Jaquan said, extending his hand with a wide smile. "And this is Carlos." "It's very nice to meet you all," Eleanor said, a small smile finally gracing her lips. "I'm Eleanor." They started with small talk, the weather, the food, the bustling atmosphere of the restaurant. Jamario steered the conversation gently, asking Eleanor about her favorite dishes at Big Ed's, drawing her out without being intrusive. Hesitantly, Eleanor began to share snippets of her story. She mentioned that she'd been coming to Big Ed's for years, that it was a special place for her and her husband. She didn't say it outright, but the sadness in her voice spoke volumes. "My husband, George," she said, her voice catching slightly, "he loved their ribs. So they were the best in the state." Jaquan, sensing her emotion, quickly chimed in. "I gotta agree with George. These ribs are amazing." He took a large, enthusiastic bite, making Eleanor chuckle. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily. They discovered a shared love for old movies, and Eleanor surprised them with her knowledge of classic rock music. George had been a huge fan. They talked about their families, their dreams, their fears. Eleanor, who had initially felt so isolated, found herself laughing genuinely, sharing stories about her life with George, their travels, their quiet evenings at home. She told them about his quirky sense of humor, his unwavering kindness, his love for their dog, Rufus. She, in turn, learned about Jamario's aspirations to become a nurse, Jaquan's dream of opening his own business, and Carlos's passion for photography. They were so young, so full of life, and yet they were genuinely interested in her story. It was a gift she hadn't expected. The food, though delicious, became almost secondary to the conversation. The shared laughter, the genuine connection, filled a void Eleanor hadn't realized was so vast. As the meal drew to a close, Eleanor felt a profound shift within her. The heavy weight of sadness had lifted, replaced by a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. These young men, these strangers, had shown her a kindness that had touched her deeply. She realized that even in the midst of profound loss, there was still room for connection, for joy, for unexpected moments of grace. "You know," she said, her voice a little stronger now, "I came here today feeling so lost and alone. It's my anniversary, and my husband, he passed away last year." She paused, taking a deep breath. "Thank you. Thank you for making this day a little bit brighter." Jamario reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. "We're glad we could be here with you, Mrs. Thompson," he said sincerely. "You have a wonderful story, and we're honored that you shared it with us." Jaquan, ever the extrovert, suggested a picture. "Let's capture this moment," he exclaimed. Eleanor, initially hesitant, agreed. It felt right, this unexpected gathering, this unlikely friendship. The photo, taken with Jaquan's phone, showed Eleanor beaming, flanked by the three young men. It was a picture of genuine connection, of unexpected joy, of a moment of kindness that had transcended age and circumstance. Jamario, later that evening, posted the photo on his social media. He didn't dwell on Eleanor's sadness, but instead focused on the positive impact of their encounter. "Spent my lunch today with this amazing woman, Eleanor," he wrote. "She reminded me of the importance of connecting with our elders, of listening to their stories, of offering a little bit of kindness to those who might be lonely. Everyone has a story to tell, and sometimes all it takes is a shared meal to make someone's day a little bit brighter." Hashtag kindness matters, hashtag respect your elders, hashtag human connection. The post went viral, quickly accumulating thousands of likes, shares, and comments. People from all over the world were touched by the story, by the simple act of kindness that had made such a profound difference in Eleanor's life. "This is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing," one comment read. "We need more young people like you," another wrote. "This made me cry. I'm going to call my grandma right now," a third added. Jamario was overwhelmed by the response. He hadn't expected the post to resonate with so many people. It reinforced his belief in the power of human connection, in the importance of reaching out to those who might be feeling lost or alone. He sent Eleanor a text message, sharing the positive response to the photo. She replied with a simple message: "Thank you, Jamario. You made my day, and you reminded me that George is still with me, in a way." Eleanor, back at home, felt a profound sense of peace. The house still felt empty, but it no longer felt oppressive. She greeted Rufus with a smile, sharing her experience with him in soft whispers. She looked at the photos of George again, but this time, the sadness was mingled with gratitude. She was grateful for the 60 years they'd shared, for the memories they'd created, and for the unexpected kindness of 3 young men who had reminded her that she wasn't alone. Jamario, inspired by his encounter with Eleanor, called his own grandmother that evening. They talked for over an hour, sharing stories and laughter. He realized how much he'd missed those conversations, how much he valued her presence in his life. The experience with Eleanor and the overwhelming response to his social media post had a lasting impact on Jamario. He became more mindful of the elderly people in his community, more willing to offer his time and companionship. He started volunteering at a local senior center, sharing his time and his stories with those who needed it most.